freedom just begun, living large under the sun.
Hello, and welcome to the SmartMAI Consulting Edge Podcast, where we speak with experienced consultants, advisors, and business leaders about how they solve difficult problems, guide organizations through change, drive sustainable growth, and create measurable results. I'm your host, Dan Mulberry. Today's episode is titled From Owner Dependent to Exit Ready. So for many entrepreneurs, the business is their largest financial asset. It represents decades of work, personal sacrifice, customer relationships, industry expertise, and accumulated value. Yet, when the owner decides to retire or begin the next chapter, the company may not be ready to sell. Critical processes exist, sometimes only in the founder's head. Customers expect to work directly with the owner. Employees escalate every decision upward. Financial records may be sufficient for taxes, but not for buyer due diligence. Technology may be outdated, responsibilities unclear, and a management team has never been tested without the founder's involvement. So our guest today helps owners solve those problems before they reach the negotiating table. So we're pleased to welcome Dr. Evan Duke, the founder of Evan Duke Enterprises and Exit Ready Technologies. He works as a fractional COO and operations exec. He helps founders build stronger operating systems, improve financial controls, document processes, strengthen management teams, modernize technology, and prepare their businesses for an eventual transition. Evan's path into business leadership is a little unusual. He earned a Doctor of Musical Arts degree in trumpet performance while also developing experience in administration, technology, nonprofit management, budgeting, analytics, operations, strategic planning, and organizational development. Wow, that's a lot, Evan. Today, his work focuses on turning owner-dependent companies into operationally independent and exit-ready businesses. Evan, welcome, and thank you for being on the show.
Pleasure to be here.
So, your early academic background in trumpet performance led you somehow to professional work that now centers on ops, strategy, tech, and business exits. How did that transition happen?
Well, I feel like what's interesting about my background is the more I've gotten into this role, the more I've actually found, especially my graduate work, really helped prepare me for it. Specifically, the thoroughness in research, well, that's what I do when it comes to making sure that we have institutional memory ready and that everything is fully prepared and exit ready. But then when it comes to the level of rigor I needed for not only my comprehensive exams, but also for my dissertation, a lot of the prep that is required by a business owner is that level, and that they need to have that rigor and preparation for any question that will be hit during due diligence.
Yeah, I can see how that musical training taught you about preparation, systems, discipline, leadership, and performance under pressure. So is operating a successful company in some ways similar to leading an ensemble where every individual may be talented, but must understand timing, rules, and larger results?
That is a great way to put it. I feel like that actually is kind of one of the reasons sometimes we have dysfunctional companies is because we have people like, in an ensemble where, they're not keeping time properly, they're coming in when they shouldn't. Well, that's a perfect parallel with business where you have somebody who's just not a team player. They're not really doing what their role is needed. And at the end of the day, and this is where I feel like, maybe if we had a little bit more music in, just life in general, just encourage people to be involved in the arts, this element of teamwork that we need in the business world would transfer much more easily.
I love that. And by the way, I've got a good friend who was a professional hockey player. Ooh. And he always makes a distinction about the benefits that being on a team brought to him. And when he's working with someone that's not a great team player, he's like, you never played team sports, did you? So the same analogy, I think, applies. So let's talk about why profitable businesses fail to sell. A lot of times owners assume that if they're profitable, someone's going to want it and want to pay for it. Why is profitability alone not enough to get the value they might be looking for?
That is a great question, Dan. And I feel at the end of the day, that is the type of question that, people really need to fully understand before they take a business to market. Profitability, basically, it's a measure of how well managed or well run a business is. And the reality is, therein lies the problem, is while it might be well run or well managed, if it's heavily owner or founder dependent, yeah, they might be great at managing it. But the problem is, if we want to have something that's transferable and they're a part of that business, well, you see, the issue is, unless basically it's like, I know with those kids' toys, it says batteries not included. Well, unless the founder comes included, then there's some legit questions about that profitability. Is it transferable? Or as soon as that founder exits, is there going to be a huge drop? So that is the big reason why. And really, it's the transferability aspect of a business that's the primary driver. Profitability is important, but if it's transferable, that is going to really help you get a really good multiple and really drive up your value.
So besides the founder and having everything in his head and the things that I talked about in the intro, and besides that founder dependence, what other things contribute to a company being undervalued? Is it around the systems, the customer concentration, weak management depth, the technology? What trends are you seeing out there?
Really, there's a fascinating correlation between owner dependency and client concentration, which, for our purposes, the 30% threshold is pretty much where most businesses really become unsellable. So if you have one business doing 30% or greater of a share of your business, then most buyers are going to walk away. Right. Ideally, I like to see that number as low as possible. But, the reason why that and founder dependency are so interlinked is because if the founder is heavily involved in everything, this includes the relationships and, the businesses that do business with that company. And what usually that means is if they're heavily involved, it's more a matter of, it's like, for lack of a better word, cult of personality is in play. I'm not using that in a derogatory term. I'm just saying that business owner and their personality is what people are doing business with and not that business. And as a result, that tends to have, businesses kind of, coalesce and take a larger share. Whereas if the business owner were not a part and you had an actual sales team being able to diversify as opposed to really concentrate your business with several accounts, that will solve that problem. But they're kind of interrelated because of that.
So last time we spoke, we discussed how many years before an owner expects to sell, they should start planning for that exit strategy. Can you talk to us about your recommendations on that?
The recommendation I would give is, and this is really what you need to do. I'm not going to say it's necessarily an ideal situation, but you need to start at least 3 to 5 years beforehand. The reason why is because, 3 years, it'd be considered, okay, we're moving along at a good clip, but you might run into some hiccups. You might have some turnover that need to address. You might, for example, one company I'm looking at, while they check a lot of boxes, there's a possibility that, we would need to get a new CEO for that company. And as a result, because of that, that's going to slow us down a bit. So that there are different reasons why a business, could take closer to 5 years as opposed to 3. The situation that I feel like is optimal for somebody, now, obviously, this is not something we all do. In fact, very few do this, is if you can start with your exit in mind when you found the business from day one, that would be your ideal situation, because that way you actually get everything built right. But the reality is, most people who start their business, they start it not because they have this grand scheme in mind. They're just good at something. And those are the people I'm really talking to. And that's really the majority of people. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just realizing you need a plan 3 to 5 years in advance.
So is that a hard sell with people? Do people react negatively to that time frame? They're thinking they can sell in 6 months or 3 months if you come in and help them?
That is usually what is the case. And usually if we're dealing with somebody who are thinking, okay, well, this needs to be a quick fix, it's not going to go anywhere. In fact, I actually had a business earlier this year that, it was a situation where the founder had gone through one of the 5Ds. It was actually, in his case, a divorce, and he needed to exit now. And he wanted to get out as soon as possible. Problem was, it wasn't going to be that. It was going to probably be, a good year or two. And just because he wanted to basically exit and essentially sell now, that's why everything fell apart. So, obviously my goal is to get it ready as quickly as possible, but being willing to be there as long as it takes, that really is the requirement. So, and some people just are not able to do that. And that's why those businesses sell at a huge discount, or they wind up being liquidated and closed.
I know one of the things you do to assess the owner dependency is your 90-day test. You want to tell us about that? That's a fascinating way to approach it.
Sure. The 90-day test is really the idea that if you were to go 90 days without any contact with your business, you could go on a vacation. I know with college football right around the corner and, pro football, which, I'm excited. That means we're not going to have a weekend without football. Yeah, I see the Gators.
Gators.
Yeah, I knowing where you are, I figured that would be the case. But the beauty of it is we're not going to have a weekend without football until I think the third weekend of February. So it's a glorious time to be alive. But having said that, let's say, okay, you decided instead of working with your business, you're going to go on a grand tour, and every week you're going to be spending in a Power 5 or Power 4, I forget what they call them now, but you're going to be in either the Big Ten, you're going to spend 1 week in a Big Ten town, the next week maybe in the SEC, then ACC, so on. And that's all you're going to do, say, for 13 weeks or 90 days. You're not going to have any contact.
Sounds like a great time to me, but sorry to interrupt.
I agree. The question would be, what happens to your business during that time?
Right.
If it's a well-built business, you're going to pass the 90-day test. Now, most businesses, it's like, okay, can you get past the weekend without doing anything? Unfortunately, maybe it's like, okay, well, can you be gone for 2 weeks? And then it's like, okay, can you be gone for 2 weeks, like maybe overlapping a pay period? So you might have to do it incrementally. But the reason why I believe the 90-day test is so valuable is, one thing I know a lot of fractional CFOs will do is they like to, think in terms of cash flow for 13 weeks. Well, that's literally 1 quarter of the year, 90 days. If you're gone for that 1 quarter, can your business grow or just even maintain? But in other words, can it remain functional with you gone? And that really is what the core of the 90-day test is.
Well, when you do that test, what do you usually see breaking first?
Wow. Some companies, it's a matter of we don't actually really get to that test just because of the fact that basically it's when you have the deer in the headlights look for the owner. Mm-hmm. And that's when it's like, okay, we got a few things to do. Ideally, that test would be, in my mind, when we want to run it and pass it, it's right when we're getting ready to take that business to market. Kind of like, a barrier exam is if that business can, be functioning without the owner present for 90 days, hey, we're ready to take it to market, because that's always going to be one of the questions a buyer is going to ask during due diligence. Can this team function without you present?
Well, I think that's a brilliant approach, and it's pretty clear either the owner can be absent or that's going to fail and he can't be absent and it needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
So, one of the things we talked about is that institutional knowledge that's primarily in the owner's head. Buyers, of course, want to know that that knowledge exists within the organization, not just in the minds of the top couple employees. What processes should a company document first when they're trying to ensure that they meet that threshold?
The first one I would say is get your product delivery and every like production, every aspect of all your product. If it involves your core product, get that documented, get the process map, get all the procedures, any relevant policies, get that, because that's essentially the playbook that, if you wanted to, if it's a business that can be turned into a franchise, you can very easily do that. But basically that's just get your core product worked out. Then, obviously, that's when we start looking at the other things, the financial aspect, the budget development and control process, your marketing process. Really, there's no real set order, and partly because they're very much interdependent once we get to this phase. But again, just because of how important it is getting, if you have your core product, all the process mapped out and every aspect of all the procedures taken care of, that's always a great starting.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the dangers with documenting processes is, I'm phrasing this wrong, but one of the outcomes is sometimes you've documented the process. Now that document goes and sits on a shelf. How do you actually institutionalize the process as opposed to simply writing it down and documenting it?
That is a great question. And really what you need to do is it's a combination of, making sure that, people have ownership of whatever part of the process is. Like, in other words, it's like that adage that when two people are responsible for feeding the horse starves. You got to make sure that every single aspect of that process, every procedure, somebody has ownership of. And that's really the first thing, is making sure that everything is clear as far as who does what and how everything fits together. But that's not enough, because that is important. But here's the thing: over time, technology changes. People figure out how to do things better. You got to visit, and that's why one of the things that I like to do, again, before we go to market, but towards the end of the engagement, once we've got all the institutional memory figured out, that's when we put in place the annual review process, where you're constantly going over, making sure that practice matches what's documented on paper.
So let's talk about employee resistance. We often see resistance to change. When you're documenting, this question is really kind of about the whole process, because what you're doing, I would imagine employees see, wow, they're going to sell the company at some point, and I need to think about what that means to me. And they may not be as supportive as they would be otherwise. But in terms of the procedures, do you get pushback from employees saying, hey, we already know how to do this. We don't need to document it, and we don't need to put, determine accountability or any of that. We just do it.
Yeah, that will happen. But really, at the end of the day, that is where, that makes sense why you would push back. And I mean, obviously, there's some, in fact, I remember one engagement. It's actually a company that I'm going to be talking with probably beginning of next week. There was some nervousness just because, like, okay, I'm coming in. Does that mean that so-and-so is going to be, on the chopping block? Or does that mean you're going to be let go? Well, the way I would respond to them is like, look, every person in this business has something that any buyer would, pay buku bucks for, and that is institutional knowledge. You all have an important part. Things that even if we were to hire the most experienced CFO or CEO, things they don't know. So getting that institutionalized, and really, again, to your point about that knowledge, is it's not necessarily just about knowledge about how you do things procedurally, but it could also be from a strategic standpoint, like, okay, we do this like on a Tuesday, we might do it this way, or if we do things that way, or so there's some strategic aspects of it as well. And this is where some people lose sight of the fact, because okay, the procedures are documented, but is there an actual decision-making process as far as like what gets escalated, what gets, put to the back of the line? But all that to kind of on the table, coming back to your question, this is where it's like, yeah, I get it, but here's the reality. What happens if you're going to stay with the company and we don't document everything? Fair enough. Okay, you've decided you're going to stick around. What happens if you get hit by a bus tomorrow on the way to work? Then what happens? And it's really about, you're not going anywhere, but we want to make sure that, if something were to happen to you and you're gone and not the owner, that we can continue to function.
Exactly. Makes sense. So another area that founders kind of keep to themselves oftentimes is decision authority.
Mm-hmm.
How do you build a management team that's capable of independent decision making without waiting for the founder's approval?
That is really what we like to do at the beginning of an engagement. And really, first thing is like, okay, who in your business do you feel is your right-hand person that we could make the CEO? Okay, we put them there. Then it's a matter of like, okay, who is somebody that we could have like as a CFO? We may not be able to have them, but we would keep filling things out, right? And then at that point, it's like, okay, the process is, just slowly start assigning like maybe one thing to Joe over here as the new CEO, maybe another thing to the CFO. And it's one thing at a time, but at the same time, it's a matter of, okay, they have to have the decision-making authority. And the reason why, as you know, that this is so important is, yes, there have been situations where a company had a CEO, a CFO. They had the entire C-suite. Yeah, it's an alphabet party just because of all the different C-suites. But because they never surrendered full decision authority, they didn't know what to do. But it's a matter of progressively empowering them one step at a time. Just because, again, it's a transition. You're not going to be able to do everything at once. But if you can do one thing at a time, delegate and say, okay, hey, you are in charge. That is how you get there.
So do you find that founders can't distinguish between delegating tasks and transferring the responsibility for those tasks?
That is something that, can happen. And really, I think part of the reason why this is such a difficult challenge with, making those distinctions is, keep in mind, this is the business that, let's say they founded it in 1990. That means, okay, they've been in business 36 years. So much of this has grown up organically. In fact, in a situation like this, you probably have a business where if you were to come in, you'd be like, okay, you're confused as far as who does what, just because the job titles are just so unique and really specialized to that business. And it's because as they grew up, okay, Joe over here is great with this, and he's also great with this. And so you have somebody who looks like this really strange, half controller, half, marketing, half, HR hybrid, and somebody over here with, the other half of the HR and maybe marketing. And really, it's that level. And it's just things have grown up organically. So that way, when it comes time to let go and do that type of stuff, it can be a little hard just because with all this organic growth, it's kind of like, with, a city like Atlanta or where I live here in South Carolina, where it's like, okay, we didn't necessarily plan for it to be the size metro area it is today. It just grew up that way. So that's kind of where I think a lot of the problem comes into play.
Well, let's talk a little about the financial and operational due diligence that the buyers take on. A lot of times that due diligence can expose years of operational shortcuts. In a matter of weeks, they can determine that. What financial information do serious buyers expect to verify? Are there a couple key things there?
Really, what I would go for is like, just really the standard business practices, like, okay, month close, are you consistently doing that? Do you have explanations for like, your variance? Like, okay, why is it that you had one variance? Do you have a budget process? Do you have a control process as far as like, okay, who is authorized to make what expenditures? And really, it's the type of stuff that at the end of the day, while I would list it up, okay, it makes sense in hindsight, but at the end of the day, it's like, okay, and let's also get down to the reporting too. One thing that, you know, we probably everybody's heard about clean books, and you even mentioned it in the intro. There's a difference between books that are ready for taxes and clean books. And really, with clean books, it's the type of thing that, kind of like when it comes to operationally. Can somebody sit down, have absolutely no knowledge, experience, whatnot with your business, and everything makes sense? That's really what it comes down to is due diligence. And if somebody feels like, oh yeah, I could run this, basically do absolutely every aspect of this business. I mean, it would take a little bit of a learning curve, but everything is here operationally or financially. It's like, okay, I'm not guessing. Well, is this the cash accrual or cash basis? Or I didn't know that you could have Lakers seasons tickets as a business expense. If, basically, if they look at it and like, okay, yeah, this makes perfect sense, you're in great shape.
So, in preparing for that kind of due diligence, should an owner conduct their own simulated due diligence, or do you help them do that before they enter the market?
Yeah, in fact, actually, what we do is I actually have a platform that I use with my engagement, and really other fractionals, which I'm in the process of interviewing to bring on to my firm. We track all of the documents because even though obviously financials and there are other pieces of information, there's actually a set like everything from basically 3 years of audited financials, insurance. There's a list of things that are pretty much standard with due diligence that you need to provide. And really what our goal is to make sure that way when it's time to sell, that we have absolutely everything ready. So basically the conversation I want to be having with the M&A advisor is as soon as we're ready to move forward is, hey, we're all ready to rock and roll. And here is every piece of information we need for due diligence. Let's have at it.
Awesome. So let's talk about technology, AI, and how that affects exit value, because it can either increase the value of a business or become a liability discovered during due diligence. So what technology weaknesses concern buyers the most?
Really, the big thing is, tech stack that is outdated. And AI does have a place, and I will get to AI in a moment. But, for example, is your accounting software, is it modern? Like QuickBooks Desktop, which I believe it's 10 to 20,000 businesses in the 5 to 50 million revenue range use it. It was discontinued in September of 24. There are some businesses that do not have a CRM. Honestly, when you get to this size, I'm not sure how you can function without one. There are some businesses that, when it comes to divvying proposals for bids on projects, they use that really high-tech device called a legal pad, which, there's possibly a chunk of our audience, basically those born after 2000, which would look and think, what in the world is a legal pad? But the reality is it's that type. And when we look into it, we think, well, wait, why is this type of stuff the case? Well, the reason why is because it was always working and was doing well. We never stopped and thought, okay, well, just because it's working well for us now doesn't mean that it's going to be what's needed for selling a business. And that's really where it kind of comes, where push comes to shove. Now, really quickly to address the AI part is if you have people who are in your business, and I've heard this, businesses, the CEC suites are saying, okay, figure out how to use AI in your business. Just that they basically say, okay, figure out how to make it work. Well, honestly, just like with anything else, if you have in due diligence coming on and saying, I don't think this is actually even ethical what you're doing, or, how is this providing value? That is the type of position that, businesses would, buyers would walk away from. And really, it's a matter of, is AI enhancing and really helping be a force multiplier? Or are you just doing it just so you can satisfy the
Right.
boss's whim? So,
Yeah, ideally, it's to solve a problem that the AI is the most efficient and effective way to solve that problem. So, and to that point, is there automation or AI tools that you've seen deployed that make a company less dependent on the founder or individual key employees?
I mean, your stat LLMs like Claude or ChatGPT. I'm a huge fan of Claude, and especially the skills. They can be used to make it less dependent. But even then, the reason why I feel like, okay, they can be helpful to a point, and usually I would say, like, okay, especially with somebody who might be new in the role, we actually kind of circle back around to, like, well, it's a great tool. The reality is AI shouldn't be making your decisions for you.
Mm-hmm.
But the root really of the problem of what I do is, it's not really with tech. It's about the founder still being involved in decision making. So yeah, well, AI, and pretty much everybody has, like, I know Gemini is everywhere. Grok. There are so many AI tools out there, as well as companies out there helping utilize AI. That, hey, if you see a fit, more power to you. Use it. The reality is, at the end of the day, it all boils down to the management team, and just, do we have that in place?
Well, to that point of how many tools are out there available to people that do so many different things, is there a risk that a company will be valued less when a company adopts too many disconnected tools, or they automate poorly defined processes?
Oh yeah, and that is. I'm really glad you bring that up, because that is that really speaks to really a disjunct tech stack where, okay, who has what, who owns what accounts, like, okay, like, you may have, like, okay, do you actually have enough user licenses for this particular program? So yeah, that something that is chaotic and disjunct like that's definitely a huge red flag, and it could be a deal killer, especially if they're like, well, could this business be hacked and become a cybersecurity risk?
Yeah, I was going to ask about cybersecurity next, whether buyers are focusing more on that. I would assume they are, given the fact that the cybersecurity risk increases on a daily basis.
Yeah, and it's funny you mention that, because I actually am working with two colleagues on it's actually a 4-part webinar we're going to be doing next month and in October. It's actually 6 exit killing scenarios. And one of the people in that team, even though he's a CPA, he does a lot of work with cybersecurity. And really, the threat of, cybersecurity is the type of thing that it really doesn't cost a lot compared to, what your business does.
Exactly.
But it's a type of thing that if you don't invest in it and you open the door for being potentially hacked, you could become unsellable.
So the last area of questions I had is around your fractional leadership and how that helps people prepare for the exit. So you work as a fractional COO or VP of Ops. What kind of businesses benefit the most from that fractional model?
Really, the area that I like to work in is the 2 million to 100 million revenue. I feel like those types of business, that revenue, the industry, I am industry agnostic. And really, the only industry I don't like to play in is GovCon, just because, again, really the M&A advisory pool as well as buyers tend to be very specialized. But really, it's that is the range. And I guess really, in addition to that 2 to 100 million revenue, as well as being industry agnostic, I guess the final piece of, what my ICP would be when it comes to, businesses I feel like I can help the most is if you're a owner who it might be 5, possibly 7 years from retirement, and you're putting in 40, 50, 60 hours a week, and you're thinking, do I really want to keep doing this? Hey, I feel like that's the best because it's about quality of life as far as what I'm concerned with what we do. And, hey, when I was president of an orchestra, there was just so much momentum and so much excitement that, I was putting in those types of hours per week. And it was just because I could see the results really developing in real time. But then, once we achieved them, and now it's like, okay, there's really not as much room for growth now that we've kind of expanded to a certain point. It's like, do I really want to keep doing this? And that's kind of those really would be what I would label as like, not only just the business, but specifically the owners that I could help the most out.
So do you find that as a fractional executive, you're able to accomplish things that are possibly more difficult for a conventional consultant who only delivers recommendations?
I guess, like, to answer that question, I feel like there's a level of power that I have that a traditional consultant does not have. Because, like, yeah, they're only giving recommendations, but really the way I and every member of our team is, we're basically a 1099 employee of the business. We're there for a day, but that means at the same time, okay, we're actually a part of your team. Mm-hmm. It's not about, yeah, I can give recommendations, but hey, a part of the recommendations might be like, guess what? I'll do this training session with all the stuff that I'm recommending that, has been developed, or I'll actually develop this, or I'll have this call with the M&A advisor. So while, yeah, a traditional consultant, as they give recommendations, I feel like I'm in the best seat in the house. I not only can give those recommendations, but I can say part of the recommendation is I'm the one handling this.
So is your ultimate objective as a fractional C-suite member to make your own role unnecessary?
Really, at the end of the day, that is kind of what a lot of fractionals do. Really, what my objective is during the first part of the engagement is really to work towards, almost essentially making my role unnecessary. But then once we go into the sale part, we pivot to being point for the sale process, as well as keeping that leadership team on track. Once the sale comes in, it's like, okay, now, hey, mission has been accomplished. But really, to your point, I feel like at the end of the day, that really is what the goal of every fractional should be, is really to work to the point where we can get that business to where they don't need us. And that really, I think that really your characterization is a very clean one there.
So final question, Evan.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that an ICP is out there listening or watching our podcast today, and they hope to sell their company within the next 5 years, but they've done very little formal preparation. What's the first test or assessment that owner should perform this month?
I think really I'd give it maybe a truncated version of the 90-day test. It's like, okay, if you want to see what you need to do in terms of getting ready, is you need to go at least 2 weeks over a pay period this month. You're gone. If you can't get to day 2 or day 3, then hey, I'm willing to sit down and listen and talk with you, but I feel like that should be your first big test, is because at that point you're going to see everything that's dependent on you, everything that breaks down. And yeah, I know it could be a very stressful time, but at the same time, that's some very useful data points that we could really use to start figuring out, okay, how can we make it so that doesn't work? That doesn't fall apart.
Well, Evan, first of all, thank you for joining me today. One of the clearest things I think that you've illustrated is how or why businesses may be successful, but not necessarily sellable. Buyers don't simply purchase revenue and profit, as we discussed. The buyer's purchasing the systems, processes, customer relationships, technology, management capability, predictable performance, and mostly the confidence that the company can continue to operate after that founder leaves.
Yeah.
The strongest exit strategy is also a strong operating strategy. And it creates a company that's easier to manage, less dependent on the owner, more resilient, more valuable, whether the owner decides to sell or continue growing it.
Yeah.
So obviously you can help with all of that, and really appreciate your insights and input. If your ICP out there wants to contact Dr. Evan Duke, how did they reach out to you?
Well, I am on LinkedIn, and my basically, if you're to type my name in, Evan Duke, probably Evan Duke, comma D period M period A period. That way you would definitely get to me. But I respond to email. It'd be info@mynameevanduke.com. No periods between the N and the D. So that, and or you could just go to my website, evanduke.com, and there's information there for how you can get in touch with me.
Perfect. Well, I can't thank you enough. And I want to thank everyone for listening. And Evan, next time I'm going to make you bring your trumpet.
I will. And it'll be a blast for all of us.
Oh, I would love to hear that. You have a great rest of your day. And everyone, thank you for watching.
Thanks. You have a great one too, Dan.
Got our freedom just begun, living large under